Hey everybody, this is Greg. Welcome to a bonus episode of What We Really Want. This is going to be a little bit of a departure from our typical conversation. This is a great conversation I got to have a little while back with a really good personal friend of mine named Darren. He is a man who's in recovery from sexual addiction, and he has been in recovery for about 4 years. And it's very important to him that he share his story. That's a part of how he is walking his recovery path, and has found that when he shares vulnerably and openly about his story and the things that he's done and the places he's been, what he believed and how that affected his life, that it has really given other people the freedom and the confidence to open up about their stories. Certainly not everybody is going to share their story on a podcast, and we don't think that everybody should. Your story is your story to tell to whomever and however and in whatever context you feel is right. But I just want you, as you listen to this talk with Darren, to think about what it would be like to be able to take the things in your life that you've struggled with the most, that you felt the most shame about, and to have a safe place to take that. That's something that Darren has discovered. That's what a lot of people in our community discover. And so, again, it doesn't have to be sexual brokenness or sexual addiction. If you struggle with substances, if you struggle with control or unhealthy relationship dynamics, just whatever it is that you struggle with that seems to keep you stuck, we hope that this conversation gives you the ability to envision what it would be like to have somewhere that you could take that with openness and honesty. And so, we hope this is going to be really encouraging and give you something to think about as you sit in on my conversation with my friend Darren.
Welcome to What We Really Want, conversations about connection. Settle in and get ready for a great conversation. Let's talk about what we really want.
This is my friend Darren that's sitting across the table from me. And we're so glad that you have joined us for this bonus episode of What We Really Want. We are just hours from finishing up one of our men's intensives, the Roots Retreat. It's been so great having you in this weekend to volunteer again. Darren has been a friend for about 4 years now. Tell us a version of what you were just saying to Stacy before we started recording and what you told me.
Okay, so what I said was I actually had wanted to do my own podcast, but I thought, why not see if I could be a guest on your podcast?
And I'm like, yes. And it just put a big smile on my face because so far I have been the one to reach out and ask everybody to be on. And thankfully, so many people have graciously said yes. It just made me feel a lot of joy that you wanted to get on, to be a guest, and to share your story. And I know enough about your story from the time that we've spent together to where I'm excited to hear what you have to share. So, Darren, I'm going to ask you what I ask most all of our guests, and that is, what do you really want out of the conversation we're going to have?
What I want is to be someone that has a different story that people can hear and hopefully identify with and be encouraged by whatever it is that I have to say. I definitely feel like the pain that I have and had has a purpose. And I feel like what better way to let people know than a podcast?
Darren, I love to hear that. I want the same thing. And really what I really want as we're getting ready to dive in is just to be able to sit in this moment with you, to listen, and even just by sitting across the table and looking at your face while you share whatever you're going to share, to be able to sit as a friend in support, just knowing that God's given me the privilege of being a part of your life and given you access to my life as well.
Oh, yeah.
And just to share this and be really, really present with you, because I love you and I love your story. And I'm really grateful that our paths have intersected. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to share. So for everybody who's listening, you've heard by now that our desire for the podcast is not just that you'd feel drawn to what we talk about if your struggle is in the area in which Awaken does most of our work, which is sexual brokenness, addiction, sexual betrayal, trauma. But we really feel like the conversations we have about connection apply to everybody, because whatever our area of brokenness is, even if it's not sexual, even if it's not an addiction, all of us, if we're really honest, will find a way that we've struggled to find really healthy, life-giving connections in our lives. And all these conversations are meant to encourage us to have more ideas on what that could look like. But this one I'm excited about because, Darren, your story is very much like my story in that it involves recovery from sexual addiction.
Yes.
And so, people listening, that's their story too. I'm really looking forward to how this is going to connect with them and hopefully give them hope. Maybe just start out by telling us a little bit about yourself, just your background, your family, just anything you want to share where that's concerned.
Okay, so I've lived in Georgia all my life. I came from a large family. There were 7 kids, and it was a blended family, and no blame anywhere, but I just was number 6 out of 7, and I just didn't get the things that I needed. And so I found ways to get what it was that I needed, which was affirmation and, love, or what I thought was love, in not the best sources. I had girlfriends, but I also had guy friends that were a little bit more than just friends. And I struggled for many years as a teenager. There was actually a time that one of my brother's best friends took advantage of me. So this went on. I tried to stop and have a girlfriend. I was engaged at one point in time, and I never really looked at it like a sexual addiction. I thought because I could stop when I wanted to, and then it would just start back up. It was like, I can control this. And so part of my story is in 2010, I attended a men's group called Walking Free. And because that was, my wife had found out, and that was a place that our church had, and that's was one of the stipulations for us to stay together. So I went, but I just went because she wanted me to. And I did work and checked off the boxes and said, after 6 or 9 months, I'm good. I know scripture. I know memory verses. I've got this thing licked. And that lasted for about 2 years. And then sometime after that, I was actually arrested. And there was a sting. And so that was kind of like a scared straight moment. So here again, I'm able to not act out because I don't want to go to jail. I'm scared. I don't do anything for a long time because I still don't know it's an addiction. And then I start slipping back into it, and I kind of like test the waters of going places that I had gone before, and then I didn't act out. So I was like, okay, I can do this. I've got enough self-control that I can go to these places. And then pretty soon, okay, I can go to the place and I can just do this one thing, but it's not as bad as doing everything else. So still, I didn't look at it as hurting anyone. Then as time went on, I just got further and further. I had 2 separate lives. I had 2 separate phones. As far as my wife knew, everything was okay. And I just had 2 secret lives, and I thought everything was good until 4 years ago, January 23rd, 2020, was my fan day. I'd sent an email to somebody wanting to meet up with them, and by God's grace, she found it, and she texted me, and she said, "You're sick." And when I saw that, something just clicked. And I text back and said, "You're right. I need help." And so that was where my journey began. I went and saw a counselor, and the counselor referred me to this group called Awaken, which is where I met you. And before I knew it, I was at Roots. And it was just incredible.
You know, I'm listening to it in the way that you're telling it, and I'm imagining what it's like to listen to a story like you just told without the context of where, like, I live basically every day, knowing a lot of the intricacies of addiction, knowing a lot of the trauma that is an earlier chapter of our stories. If I didn't know very much that I've learned out of my own story and out of working with people for so long, it's very easy to hear a story like you shared, because so far you've mostly shared the surface details, right? These are the things that happened. And that could come across like to some people like a Lifetime movie, right? And it's like there is definitely a tendency among some to hear stories like that, and without knowing that there's more to the story, to not feel very much compassion. And when they heard that your wife had reached out to you and said, Darren, you're sick, they're hearing that as like, you're sick, because there's different ways of taking that. It could be, look, you sicko, you pervert, or it could be, hey, you're not well. And I'm just wanting to pause and acknowledge that the people listening, depending on your experience and how you've been harmed and what you've been exposed to, like there could be a lot of different ideas going on and floating around about your story, which is one of the reasons why I'm so grateful at your openness. Like, thank you already for what you've shared, because there's a vulnerability to that. And I know you well enough to know that you've been working on that vulnerability and developing enough security in the life that you're coming to experience to where you're not afraid to do that anymore. And yet to put it out there in the form of a podcast, that's a risky thing to do. And I just want to check in with you. Like, how is it feeling now as you've shared what you have so far? I can't wait to hear more.
Actually, it doesn't feel, I was nervous and scared, but, I think the fact that I'm talking with you, we're become very good friends because of my experience, Roots 4 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Something that you said early on in your story was being the sixth of 7 children, living a lot of your early years, not really having your needs met sufficiently. Do you remember like what you noticed even back then? Like, what were some of those needs that started that process of, I've got to figure out a way to get this need met because it's not being met by other people?
Okay, so a little bit of background. I said that my family was 7 and blended family. Before I was even 2 years old, my parents were divorced, and my dad remarried very quickly. So I didn't really have a mother because my stepmother did not want to be in the role of being my mother because my birth mother was still in the picture. So it was very confusing when I tried to call her mom, and she didn't. She wanted me to call her by her name. So that right then, there's really like no attachment. And so the only person that I really had an attachment to was Daddy. And he was a strong male figure. And I believe that's where the only place that I could get those needs met. Because there's pictures of me with my 2 younger sisters. So I was, just around girls and really not any male influence other than my dad. Yeah, so I feel like at an early age, the needs that I had, I felt like could only be met by my dad, who was male, because I didn't have a female mother figure in my life.
Right.
So
I think that's an important thing that you're talking about now, because when we pursue behaviors, habits, things that turn into addictions sometimes, it's easy to say, why would you do something like that? Like that, you should have been able to predict that would be unhealthy. But a lot of time, well, maybe all the time, underneath that sideways attempt to get it is a legitimate need, right? And there's some part of you that recognized how important it was for you to be accepted and affirmed and loved and held by a strong man.
Right.
And, things, just that concept itself, don't know how many people I've talked to who have had a similar story to that. And when you've got that kind of internal experience, and then a lot of us learn how to use things like masturbation or pornography in order to self-soothe or comfort ourselves, then it's very easy for whatever the need was, whether it was the need for a strong male figure or a strong female figure or this or that, whatever it was that made us feel safe and secure gets sexualized.
Right.
And it doesn't really matter what it is. Underneath it is a legitimate need. But when we start going sideways with it, we don't have the capacity to understand what's going on. And then by the time we have the capacity or maybe have the age and the intellectual ability to do that, we still don't have capacity because we're so bogged down with addictive behaviors or trauma responses or things like that. So
right.
That's interesting to me hearing now, sitting here today, you have a clarity that I imagine was anything but clear just a few years ago.
Oh yeah. When I came to Roots, I had no idea why I was doing the things that I was doing. I just knew that I did them all the time. And that's when it was very clear that I couldn't do it on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I came to Roots to get help, which is very interesting because my first night there, I got everything but help.
Tell me more about what you mean by that.
So one of the things that I developed early on in my childhood was sarcasm. And I'm very sarcastic. And I had a roommate. We didn't know each other at all. We had just met.
Yeah, and you're referring to a conversation that you had with your roommate back in the hotel room after the activities were over, where it was kind of a jokey thing, but it also kind of had a sexual undertone to it, and it really made him uncomfortable and created a situation that we had to address.
I think, I would like to think that I was joking, but to be honest, I don't think I was, because it was still the old me. And anytime I got any kind of affirmation from another guy, that just filled my tank so much because they noticed me. So, that just made me feel very good. And I didn't really know, why. So then we have our nightly session where we, do an exercise. And then after the exercise, you and another person pull me aside in a room and you say to me, we want to make sure that everyone feels safe. So we are going to split you up. He'll be in his own room and you'll be in your own room. And I felt rejected and isolated. All the things that I learned the next day, which is why I would act out. And one of the things was me being by myself. In such a large family, I was never by myself. The only time I was by myself is if I was punished.
Wow.
And so that's what that felt like.
Of course it felt like that.
And I didn't know how to handle it. And you guys were like, we'll check on you. And, we want to make sure you're okay. And I pretty much was just like, F you. I don't care anything about you. You don't care anything about me. And don't act like you do. Mm-hmm. I was so hurt and so rejected. I wanted to leave. And I had my car and I very well could have. Mm-hmm. And I went to my room and I just cried myself to sleep. I remember the phone ringing in the room and I remember me saying, I'm not answering it. I don't care who's on the other end. Mm-hmm. I've made up my mind. I'm getting up in the morning. I'm leaving. Well, I don't know what happened, but I got up the next morning, went back in and I began to learn things about myself that explained some of the trauma that I had been through that caused me to act the way that I was acting. And one of those things was about me being alone.
Yeah.
And why I couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
And I can honestly say I still was very angry.
I remember. Yeah. Now, I'm not making light of that. I remember how tense and awkward it felt. And I remember even the night before, when we had made that decision, which is so hard,
Right.
because at one of these retreats, everybody's bringing something in and we're trying our best to provide a safe environment for everybody. And when there seems to be some conflict, it's like, oh my gosh, if I give this guy what he needs, it's going to make this guy feel this. And I think ultimately we've all settled into confidence that the thing that needed to happen is what happened.
Right.
But in the moment, one of the last things that I ever want to do is hurt a person. And so there was a lot of, oh God, just please protect me from doing the wrong thing here. Isn't it interesting looking back from the perspective of some time has passed to realize how many different parts of yourself and your experience were all just crowding into the same space and all screaming for attention, causing so much confusion.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's that, it goes back to impact versus intent.
Mm-hmm.
You did not intend for me not to feel safe, but you had to make sure the other person felt safe.
And consciously, you didn't intend to make your roommate feel unsafe.
Right.
But the impact, whether it was conscious, subconscious, whatever was driving that sarcastic comment, the impact was he did feel unsafe.
Right.
So now we've got the convergence of two impactful events that are in conflict with one another.
Right.
And having to try to settle it.
Yes. And so, like I said, I came back and I was able to learn through my trauma experience a lot of the reasons why I was doing the things that I was doing and why I was feeling the way that I was feeling. And one of the things I learned is that if you hurt me, I'm just going to take it. Because if I tell you you hurt me, you won't be my friend. And that was the most important thing, was for everyone to like me. And pretty much everyone did like me. But if there was a time where someone didn't like me, then what do I need to do for you to like me? Because I'm certainly not going to tell you that you hurt me.
And what do I need to become
Right.
in order to make you like me?
Right.
And then what you end up liking is the version of myself that I'm presenting and not necessarily the true me.
Right. Right. It's who you wanted me to be so that you would like me.
Which can feel even lonelier than having no connection at all sometimes.
Right.
Yeah. So you decided to stay.
Right.
And you were still mad. And yet you started to open yourself up to hearing some things, experiencing some things. What happened after that?
So after I opened myself up and experienced some things, one of the things that I experienced was sculpting out one of my childhood traumas that I really didn't realize how much of an effect that it had on me, but clearly it did. And because I was able to go back and kind of understand that it wasn't my fault, I'm not saying that I'm making any excuses, but just that incident that happened to me is the whole impact versus intent. What was said to me was not meant to make me feel the way that I felt, but I still felt that way. And I didn't let anyone know that I felt that way. I just carried it. And, at 13, what does a 13-year-old do with that? Who does he go to explain how he's feeling? Because he doesn't really know how he's feeling.
Well, and how would a 13-year-old even know that the thing to do is to open up if, when you've tried in the past, you've been responded to with, well, no, I don't want you to refer to me that affectionately. Just call me by my name. Or, you haven't had the training to nurture that skill or develop that skill of asking for help.
Right.
And a 13-year-old is not going to just instinctively do that in most cases.
Yeah.
So you were realizing you were connecting some dots, and something that had been happening in real time at the intensive weekend was taking you back and reminding you of some things that had happened earlier.
Right.
So what did that do for you to make that realization, make that connection?
Oh, it made it so much like I understood where I was as far as I began to not be so angry with you guys because I was able to look at it from your point of view as someone's not going to feel safe and someone is. You had no idea the impact that it was going to have on me.
Mm-hmm.
And so since I was able to look at it like that, and I knew that you did not intend to hurt me, then I was able to take that and understand what I needed to do, which was look inside me and start learning to love me, the true me, and not try and show people, like I could finally take off my mask.
Well, and what I remember about that weekend is another thing that allowed you the capacity to do was to communicate a desire to make an amends with your roommate, with the person that had been made to feel uncomfortable by that sarcastic comment. And that was huge to me because I know that you were still tender when that was happening. And I'm grateful that the response that you got was what we all hoped it would be, which was acceptance and forgiveness and accepting your amends. And I felt like I was watching some healing that was going on just in the whole situation.
Oh, yeah.
And then you communicated about that to me later, that meant a lot to you.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and then that was in 2020.
Right.
You kept up with me periodically in the time, after that, in the next year and a half, 2 years. You'd call me from time to time and let me know how things were going.
Right.
And I want to kind of hear you talk a little bit about what was going on in your life that I wasn't privy to, that I would hear bits and pieces of when you checked in. But first, I just want to say that every time we talked, it seemed like I was talking to a little bit different version of Darren than the previous time.
Oh, yes.
You seem to be more at peace. You seem to be more comfortable with who you were. One of the main things I noticed is you seem to be much more aware and in touch with things that were going on inside you, which is exactly the growth that you realized earlier that was needed,
right? That
was necessary. You were a lot of things were waking up inside you, weren't they?
Oh yeah, definitely. So like I said before Roots, I had at least 2 different versions of me, and there were so many lies and so many secrets. But after Roots, there weren't. I hadn't had disclosure yet, but there were no new lies. And, my wife and I were living together, and she said when I got back from Roots, she could tell a difference just in those 4 days. But, she was like, that doesn't mean, we're staying together or whatever, but, I can definitely tell that there's a difference. And so that was encouraging. And so what started as asking for help continued. So after Roots, then I did the 12-step program with Grace Through Addiction. And it was just amazing. I connected with, and, our friendship just began to continue to grow. And, this is all during COVID. So I'm doing this on Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
But I had just, I was so broken that I just wanted to be healed. And so I was willing and wanted to do whatever that took. So I went to Roots, then I did the 12 steps, and then I started attending Walking Free, and my wife was like, why don't you come to this instead of doing virtual? Because, you'll have some contact with, people. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, sure, that means we can ride together, because she was going to the women's group journey. Mm-hmm. And I was just so grateful that she had not decided what she was going to do yet. But I knew that I just had to continue to work on myself. And the biggest thing that I learned was in working on myself and working on my relationship with God, that was huge, because one of my biggest fears was being alone. And if she divorced me, I would be alone. And when it originally all came out on my fan day, I was like, I can't let that happen, because if she leaves me, I'll be alone. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to kill myself because I could not be alone. So as I continued on the journey and I grew closer to God, what I learned was she could leave me, and that would hurt so bad because I loved her so much. Mm-hmm. But I wasn't alone, because God was there, and he was always there. I just never thought to look or cared, or I was just concerned about myself, no one else.
Well, the thing that strikes me, Darren, as I'm hearing you talk right now, is what changed wasn't his proximity, but it was your awareness in connecting to that proximity.
Right.
And I'm thinking about, okay, well, what changed that helped you to be able to see that he was there? And it was two things that you've mentioned, or three things that you've mentioned that were connected. One was going to the intensive, in which you were very closely connected with people who loved and supported you.
Right.
And then the step study, in which you were connected even virtually with men who loved you and supported you.
Right.
And then going back to Walking Free, in which you were in a community where people loved you and supported you.
Right.
And so often, because I don't want this part to get missed, so often we're like, God, where are you? God, where are you? And those questions, I think, most often get asked from a place of isolation. And God's there, but we can't feel it because God's not visible to the naked eye, you know? And, some people say they've had experiences with this. I've never heard him speak to me audibly. So I can't see him. I can't hear him. I can't physically touch him. And so the way that I see, hear, and touch God is by being around other people who are part of his family.
Right.
And I mean, does it seem like that was one of the big factors for you?
Oh, yeah.
And helping you to see that even if your wife had left, that you wouldn't have been alone?
Right. So on that point, I will share something that after Roots that you challenged me to do. You said, I would like to challenge you to share your story with people that have no connection to your story. Nothing to do with same-sex attraction or anything like that. And I remember just saying, I appreciate that, but no. And, and I meant that because I was like, it was one thing to share it with like 11 guys in a room. I would never really see them again because we're in totally different states. But so it was still scary, but I also knew that I was there for a reason, and if I wanted to have any true authenticness, I had to be true myself. Mm. So I was asked to share my story at Walking Free, and there's this guy that his story was completely different than mine. But when I stood up there in front of a room of 25 or 30 guys, our eyes connected. And he was just with me the whole way. And to this day, we're such good friends because that was the connection that I needed from someone that was nothing like me. And God knew that. And you knew that, which is why you challenged me to do that.
Well, I think it's interesting that you say a guy who is nothing like you, because there's probably a lot about him that is like you.
Right.
But that's how it seemed, though, wasn't it?
Right.
Because the thing that was different was the thing that made you feel the most unique and unworthy and shameful, right? And
Right.
because that wasn't his experience, Therefore he's nothing like me.
Right.
And I just think it's important to point that out. That's a perspective that it's not true, but dadgum, it feels true.
Right.
And so it might as well be if we allow that to keep us stuck. But you didn't, even when you were feeling that way. And something about what you noticed in his attunement to you, when you talked about being locked in, I'm picturing like eye contact, calm, loving expression on his face.
Exactly.
Which calms you and makes you feel seen.
Yes.
And understood and accepted. Sharing a part of our story that we believe this has the highest probability of resulting in rejection. Once people know this, whatever this is,
right.
Whether it's drug addiction, same-sex attraction, whether it's, you fill in the blank. It could be 1,000 different things.
Right.
When they find out about this, if I'm honest about this, that face is going to change. The smile is going to turn into a scowl. They're going to turn around and walk out, and all of my fears are going to be realized.
Right.
But then that didn't happen.
That's that lie. If you really knew me, you wouldn't love me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I had lived with for so long. And it's because fear kept me from sharing anything. And then once I found out I could share, then fear had no more control. And I loved it. And I wanted to share my story with as many people as I could, which is one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast, because I hope as many people can hear it.
Yeah. So then subsequent phone calls that you would make, just checking in, you'd talk about how you were helping others in this way, you were leading in this way, you'd been given or asked to take this responsibility in your group, and like more and more and more, helping to welcome in newcomers. And it was amazing, not because I didn't think you had it in you, but because I think when I met you, you didn't think you had it in you to be of any use or any ability
right.
to help or serve or be worth anything to anybody else. And to see that change was amazing.
I know you say this, and I've actually made a T-shirt that says this: connection heals. And, that's the thing when I went 10 years ago to Walking Free. And then when I came to Roots, when I was at Walking Free 10 years ago, 2010, there was no connection. Because there was no intimacy. No one could see inside of me. They could not know my story. So just by them knowing a little pieces, there was no way I could connect with anybody.
Yeah.
But I wasn't ready to connect with anyone.
You weren't showing up at that time for connection.
Right.
You were showing up to dodge a bullet and avoid a consequence. And that's what leads us to the place of saying, I'm good. This is enough. I've got the tools now. And I've said oftentimes that two of the most dangerous words for a recovering person to ever say is, I'm good.
Right.
As soon as we say that, we should probably pay attention because we're not.
Right. Well, and it's just amazing that, I can honestly say that connection heals. Because I've been so connected with so many different groups, men's groups. There's just so much that I can turn to and know that if I don't get the first person, I'll get somebody. And also, if I don't get them, that doesn't mean that they are ignoring me. There's just something else that could be going on, and they can respond later, and I have to be okay with that.
Yeah, but saying I have to be okay with that is easier said than done, isn't it? I think it's important that we realize that those situations that trigger us, that remind us of past wounds, as long as we're in this life, they're never going to completely go away.
Right.
And so when, obviously we try to avoid unnecessarily inflicting harm on other people. And when we do, and they bring it up, we want to make that right. But we know that we're going to keep getting hurt. And so pain avoidance, which was one of the old strategies, medicating, numbing out, doing something unhealthy, that no longer seems like a good option. And so asking for help becomes the best option. It always was.
Right.
But now, even though it's difficult to do, it's something where we're building some experience of it actually paying off.
Right.
And I know that that's been the case for you, just from what you've told me.
Well, and not even necessarily just asking for help, but being able to express hey, I'm feeling this way because you did this or said this.
Mm-hmm.
Because before I couldn't do that because I took the risk of you not being my friend.
Right.
And I didn't want to take that risk. Now, I mean, things with my wife have gotten so much better because there's such an honesty. I can talk to her about stuff that I never thought I could talk to her about.
Wow.
And, I'm just so grateful for Roots. I totally feel like it was the catapult that just shot me in the direction that I needed to go. And I just continue to do whatever I need to do.
So great to hear and just to have been a part of your ongoing story. And obviously we've just been talking about the last 4 years, a little bit about what led to it. And I'm really grateful for your friendship and really, really grateful and thankful that you decided that you wanted to put your story out there. I just have a story in my head that there are going to be people who hear this who really needed for somebody to show them what it's like to be that vulnerable and authentic with their story.
And that's what I wanted to do. And I definitely thank you for the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, love you, brother.
I love you too.
Thanks.